Your sister is independent and hardworking. You're still freelancing, aren't you? Dad's words sliced through the clinking of silverware like a sudden crack of thunder. The dining room fell quiet for a heartbeat, the kind of pause that isn't accidental. It's deliberate, hanging in the air to see if I'd flinch. What if one quiet sentence at the dinner table exposed years of secrets? Don't miss this. I didn't. I smiled. It wasn't the wide, cheerful smile I use for family photos. It was a quiet, knowing curve of my lips, the kind that hides entire ledgers behind it. I folded my napkin on my lap, pressed my hands together and let him continue, pretending his casual jab hadn't lodged itself like a splinter under my skin. It was a chilly Friday evening around 7:15. The October air had followed us inside, still clinging to our coats. The dining room lights were warm but a little too bright. They cast sharp shadows on faces, making every glance more noticeable. My sister, Melissa, sat across from me, hair perfectly styled, nails freshly done, smiling like the golden child she'd always been. I'd brought homemade apple pie, still warm. It sat untouched in the corner like I did at that table, present, visible but quietly sidelined. Dad speared a piece of roast beef with exaggerated calm. You know, Melissa's just so driven, he said, eyes flicking to me. She's made such a name for herself. Independent. Focused. Always has a plan. Melissa tilted her head in mock humility, pretending to blush. She was good at that, pretending. Oh, stop, she giggled, glancing at me with a flicker of something sharp beneath her sweetness. We all have different paths. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Not anger. Not shock. Just a steady, simmering awareness. I'd heard versions of this conversation for years, but tonight it felt different. Maybe it was the way Dad lingered on independent. Maybe it was the way Melissa's eyes dared me to react. Or maybe it was simply that I had grown tired of being the silent financier behind her flawless performance. I placed my fork down softly. Well, I said, still smiling, then I guess it makes sense for me to cancel the $3,500 I give her every month. The sound was instant, a collective intake of breath like the room itself had gasped. Melissa froze mid-laugh. Dad's fork clinked against his plate. Mom's hand hovered halfway to the gravy boat, stuck between politeness and panic. I leaned back slightly as if I hadn't just detonated a quiet bomb. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Their faces told me everything. The shock, the disbelief, the sudden shifting of unspoken truths. Melissa recovered first. What are you talking about? She asked too quickly. Her voice rose half a pitch. You're exaggerating. I tilted my head, calm. Am I? The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was thick. Heavy. Years of family dynamics were suddenly visible, like dust motes caught in sunlight. Dad looked between us, confused but not entirely surprised. A man who had benefited from not asking questions. Mom cleared her throat. Let's not make this into a scene, she whispered, reaching for her water glass. But the scene had already been made. While everyone stared at me, I stared at Melissa. She was good at masking emotion, but tonight her eyes betrayed her. A flicker of fear. A twitch at the corner of her mouth. She hadn't expected me to say it out loud, not here, not in front of them. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to sit in it, to feel its edges. A car passed outside, its headlights cutting through the dining room curtains for a moment, illuminating the unease like a spotlight. Somewhere in the kitchen the old wall clock ticked, steady and loud as if counting down to something. I knew something they didn't. Well, remembered something they didn't. Every payment. Every favor. Every temporary loan that turned permanent. I kept records. Not obsessively, just carefully. When you spend years being the family's quiet solution, you learn to document your generosity. Someday you might need the receipts. Tonight wasn't the reveal. But it was the first crack in the performance. Are you really bringing this up now? Melissa hissed under her breath, but everyone heard. Kept my voice low even. You brought it up when you let him call you independent. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Let's not fight, he muttered. It's just a compliment. Is it? I asked gently. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. The power wasn't in volume, it was in precision. Melissa crossed her arms, a practiced move that usually made her look confident. But tonight, under that light with everyone watching, it looked defensive. She tried to laugh it off. This is ridiculous, she said, forcing a smile. She's making it sound like I'm dependent. I finished for her. She stopped mid-sentence. For the first time she didn't have a clever comeback. The roast beef grew cold. The gravy congealed. My apple pie filled the room with a warm, sweet smell, but nobody touched it. It was ironic. The dessert meant to bring us together was now sitting untouched while the truth simmered between us. I noticed Mom's hands fidgeting with her napkin, folding and refolding it. She hated conflict, especially between her daughters. Dad rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man suddenly realizing he'd stepped on a live wire. But me? I sat steady. Years of biting my tongue had trained me for this exact moment. Inside something shifted. A line that had always been blurred, between giver and taker, between silence and truth, finally sharpened. Then a small but telling moment. Melissa's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it nervously. The screen lit up with the name landlord. She quickly flipped it over face down. No one else noticed. But I did. That was the first clue of the night that this story was about to get much deeper than a snide comment over dinner. I reached for my water, taking a slow sip. You know, I said, breaking the tension just enough. It's funny. Some people love being called independent, until the funding stops. Melissa's cheeks flushed. You're twisting things, she snapped. I haven't twisted anything, I replied calmly. I've just stopped pretending. The old wall clock ticked louder in the silence that followed. Tick, tick, tick. Melissa glanced at Dad, waiting for him to rescue her. But for once he didn't speak. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he finally saw what I had seen for years. I thought about the first time I'd sent her money. She'd called crying, saying she needed help just for 1 month, to cover rent after losing her job. I'd wired it instantly. Then it became another month. And another. Years later it was automatic, quiet, and acknowledged. They called her independent. I called it convenient. And tonight, for the first time, I'd let that truth breathe in the open. The evening stumbled on after that, but nothing returned to normal. Conversations were forced short. Melissa poked at her food. Mom tried to talk about the weather. Dad cleared his throat a dozen times but said nothing more about ambition or independence. I answered politely, laughed where expected, but inside my mind was already somewhere else, quietly assembling the pieces. Years of transactions, statements, favors, emails. All there waiting. Melissa didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end of a dinner conversation. It was the beginning of a reckoning. When dessert time came, nobody wanted pie. Mom offered to pack me a slice for later. I declined. I didn't need sweetness tonight. As we stood to leave, Melissa cornered me near the doorway. Her smile was gone now. What are you trying to do? She whispered, eyes sharp. I looked at her calmly. Nothing, I said. Just letting the truth out for a bit. Feels lighter in the room, doesn't it? She stared at me, realizing for the first time that I wasn't bluffing. I adjusted my coat, picked up my empty pie dish and walked toward the door. Behind me the house was silent. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that comes after a fault line shifts. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. I just left them sitting with the echo of my sentence. Then I guess it makes sense for me to cancel the $3,500 I give her every month. The night air was cool on my face as I stepped outside. I could still hear faint murmurs through the closed door. Dad questioning, Mom soothing, Melissa scrambling to explain. I smiled again, that same quiet, knowing smile. They had no idea. Not yet. The words echoed in my head as I unlocked my front door that night. The house greeted me with silence, the kind that feels both comforting and heavy. I placed the empty pie dish on the kitchen counter, slipped off my shoes and hung my coat on the hook by the door. I didn't turn on the television or call anyone to vent. I didn't need to. Something in me had already shifted. For years I'd played my part in our family's unspoken story. The dependable one, the fixer, the sister who helped out. But that dinner table crack wasn't just about a snide remark. It was the first ripple of a tide I'd been holding back for years. I walked to the kitchen table, sat down slowly and folded my hands. My reflection stared back faintly from the darkened window. Calm, steady, almost unfamiliar. This wasn't anger. It was precision. The next morning began quietly. The coffee maker sputtered its usual rhythm as the sun crept through the blinds, painting soft stripes across the wooden floor. I wrapped my robe tighter and stared at the steam rising from my mug. I hadn't slept much. My mind had spent the night wandering through years of, "Can you help me just this once? And I'll pay you back soon." It was amazing how clearly those words came back now. I opened my old laptop, the same one Melissa had once called outdated when she visited, and navigated to a folder I hadn't touched in a long time. Buried beneath invoices, taxes, and old projects was one simply labeled M. I hovered over it for a second, then double-clicked. The folder opened like a time capsule. Bank statements, transfer receipts, email confirmations, a trail of every temporary favor I'd ever extended. At first I'd kept them for simple bookkeeping. But over the years the collection grew. Each file represented another moment I'd stepped in to keep her world stable while she soaked up praise for being independent. I scrolled to the earliest entry. January 2019, rent transfer. $3,500. I remembered that night vividly. She'd called crying, said she'd just lost her job and needed help, just for 1 month. I didn't even hesitate. She was my sister. Of course I'd help. February. March. April. Month after month there it was, the same amount. Sometimes more. Car repairs. Hospital co-pays. Networking trips. Each time I told myself I was doing the right thing. Now staring at it all laid out in neat little files, it hit me, I hadn't just helped. I'd enabled a performance. And I had the receipts. I opened a new spreadsheet. Column A, month. Column B, description. Column C, amount. Column D, notes. I began entering the information one line at a time. My fingers moved steadily. January. February. March. By the time I reached 2021, the total was already jaw-dropping. The house was still except for the soft clicking of the keyboard. It was oddly satisfying. Every figure I typed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd handed away without notice. Around 8 a.m. my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa lit up the screen. "Hey, about last night. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. I flipped the phone over and kept typing. By midday I needed a break. I went outside to rake leaves in the yard. The crisp autumn air cleared my head. Across the fence my neighbor Joan was trimming her chrysanthemums. She was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, and had a way of reading situations without prying. He gave me a knowing look. "Rough dinner." I chuckled softly. "You could say that." She leaned on her rake. Quiet ones always carry more than people realize. One day they notice. And when they do, things change. Her words lingered. She didn't know the details, but she'd seen the dynamic over the years. The visits, the phone calls, the way Melissa breezed in and out like she was owed something. I went back inside feeling steady. Like each leaf I raked away cleared more mental clutter. That evening I printed the spreadsheet. The printer hummed, spitting out page after page. I took a red pen and underlined the growing total at the bottom. $97,000 so far, and I wasn't finished. I laid the pages out on the dining table, forming a timeline. Seeing it physically spread across the wood was almost surreal. These weren't just numbers. They were years of late-night calls, quick transfers, excuses, promises, silence. I traced my finger over one line. June 2020. Car payment. I remembered that call. She'd claimed her car was about to be repossessed. I'd sent the money that same afternoon. 2 days later, she'd posted a beach selfie with the caption, "Spontaneous road trip. #freedom, #independent woman." I remembered scrolling past it, my stomach twisting. I'd said nothing. But now, as I highlighted that entry, the bitterness wasn't painful. It was clarifying. My phone rang around 7:30 p.m. Her name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Hi," I said evenly. Melissa's voice was soft, hesitant. I didn't like how things ended last night." "You didn't like that I told the truth," I replied. She sighed. "You blindsided me. In front of Mom and Dad. You've been taking $3,500 from me every month for years," I said calmly. "If anyone's been blindsided, it's me." She tried to explain. Setbacks, bad timing, promises of paying me back soon. Her voice carried that familiar mix of guilt and practiced helplessness. When she finished, I simply said, "I have records of everything, Melissa. Every dollar. Every month. This isn't just about one dinner." Pause. "Records," she repeated. "Yes," I said. "You'll see." I ended the call before she could respond. The house grew quiet again. I brewed a cup of tea and sat at my desk, reading through the statements like chapters of a long-forgotten book. Some entries made me shake my head in disbelief. Others made me laugh quietly, not because they were funny but because I finally saw the pattern without the emotional fog. Then the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Melissa. "Hello, this is Greg," a polite male voice said. "I'm Melissa's landlord. She gave me your number for emergencies a while ago. I just wanted to confirm if the rent for next month is still coming from your account." My grip on the mug tightened. She'd given him my number. Like I was some kind of financial guarantor. I took a slow breath. "No," I said. "It's not." "Oh, should I speak to her then?" "Yes," I replied. "You should." When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment. That call wasn't random. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, the structure she'd built where my help wasn't a favor anymore. It was assumed. And I had just started dismantling it. Over the next 3 days I worked quietly. Each evening after dinner I returned to my project. I added annotations, highlighted patterns, flagged promises never kept. I found emails where she thanked me dramatically and in the same week, bought new clothes online. The total climbed. $112,000, $118,000, $126,000. Every new figure wasn't just money. It was a revelation. I didn't tell anyone, not mom, not dad, not Joan. The ledger was mine alone, built behind closed doors. For years our family arguments had been vague and emotional. Now I had something undeniable. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about clarity. Control. By the end of the week I slid the finished pages into a black binder. The cover clicked shut like a lock. I ran my fingers across it slowly. It wasn't heavy but it felt weighty, like holding years of unspoken truth in tangible form. Melissa thought my quiet smile at the dinner table was the end of the conversation. She had no idea it was just the beginning. I closed the black binder gently, the sound echoing faintly through the quiet kitchen. The weight of it in my hands wasn't just paper. It was years of unspoken truth, neatly documented and sealed. I slid it into the drawer by the dining room, right where I could reach it easily when the time came. And I knew exactly where that time would be. My table. The very next day I brewed my morning coffee and sat down with my planner, the one I usually used for work deadlines and grocery lists. This time I opened it to a fresh page. Across the top I wrote in neat block letters. Dinner. My house. Not a family get-together. Not a holiday. Just a simple evening meal hosted by me on my terms. The date I chose was the following Friday. That gave me 6 days. 6 days to set the stage. 6 days to prepare every detail, not just the meal but the atmosphere. If they wanted to build their stories around me, then they'd have to do it under my roof this time. I started with the invitations. Nothing fancy, just simple handwritten cards on cream paper. I wanted it to feel warm, familiar, like any other family dinner. But the precision of each line made my hands steady in a way they hadn't been in years. Family dinner at my house. Friday 7 p.m. I'd love for everyone to come together. I placed them in envelopes and mailed them the same afternoon. No group texts. No last-minute calls. Formal, deliberate, undeniable. That evening I went through the house room by room. The dining area got my full attention. The table, old oak polished by decades of family meals, gleamed under the soft overhead light. I ran my fingers along its edge, remembering birthdays, Thanksgivings, laughter, and also the quiet moments where I'd sat at this same table wiring money while Melissa posted smiling pictures online. I opened the drawer and glanced at the black binder again. Just the sight of it calmed me. This wasn't a confrontation born out of rage. It was structure. Quiet, calculated structure. By Wednesday the RSVPs had trickled in. Mom called first. "Oh honey," she said, her voice warm. "It's been too long since we've all sat down together. I'm so glad you're hosting." I could almost picture her smile. She loved family dinners but she hated conflict. She'd walk into this evening expecting a cozy night. I didn't correct her. Then Dad called. His tone was a bit more measured, like he was testing the ground. "Your sister said you invited us for dinner. Everything all right?" "Of course," I replied lightly. "Just a simple dinner. My house this time." Pause. "All right. We'll be there." And finally Melissa texted. "See you Friday. Hope this isn't weird." I stared at that message for a long time. It was classic her, pretending to be casual while fishing for control. I typed back a simple reply. Looking forward to it. The days leading up to Friday carried a strange energy. I went about my work as usual, but every time I passed the dining room, I felt a quiet pulse under my ribs. Like something was slowly building. Not tension exactly, but inevitability. Thursday night I set the table. Crisp white tablecloth. My grandmother's china, which I rarely took out except for special occasions. Wine glasses polished until they caught the light. And then at each place setting I placed a thick red envelope, sealed and unmarked. One for each of them, Mom, Dad, and Melissa. I stood back and looked at the table. The warm glow of the overhead light made the envelopes stand out starkly against the white cloth. A small part of me almost laughed. They looked like props in a play, and in a way they were. This dinner wasn't about food. It was about truth sitting quietly on a table waiting to be opened. Friday arrived cool and crisp. By late afternoon, the house smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and rosemary. I chopped vegetables methodically, the knife tapping a steady rhythm against the cutting board. It was a comforting sound. As I worked, the phone buzzed twice with messages from Melissa. Should I bring dessert? Is Dad supposed to bring wine? I answered both politely, nothing more. She was nervous, I could tell by the way she kept checking in. She'd probably spent all week replaying the dinner conversation in her head, wondering how much I meant what I said. She had no idea what was waiting for her. At exactly 6:45, the doorbell rang. Mom and Dad arrived first, carrying a bottle of red wine and a bouquet of flowers. Mom kissed my cheek and stepped inside, commenting on how beautiful everything looked. It feels cozy, she said, setting the flowers in a vase. You always make everything so welcoming. I smiled. I'm glad you're here. Dad gave me a curt nod, polite but wary. He looked around the table, eyes landing briefly on the red envelopes before moving on. I saw the flicker of curiosity there, but he said nothing. Melissa arrived a few minutes later. She breezed through the door wearing a new coat and that practiced smile she always used in family gatherings. Soft, sweet, calculated. He carried a store-bought pie. Sorry I'm late, she said lightly. Traffic was crazy. It's fine, I replied, taking the pie and setting it on the counter. Her eyes scanned the dining table quickly. I caught the moment she noticed the envelopes. Her gaze lingered half a second longer than everyone else's. Then she forced a cheerful laugh. Wow, this looks formal. I met her eyes and said evenly, it's just dinner. We sat down promptly at 7. The chicken came out perfectly golden, the vegetables tender. Mom started talking about a new neighbor down the street. Dad poured wine. For the first few minutes, it almost felt like any other family dinner. But underneath the polite chatter I could feel Melissa watching me. She laughed at the right times, nodded along with Mom's stories, but her shoulders were tight, her hands occasionally fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. Halfway through the meal, I noticed Dad glance again at the envelopes. He cleared his throat. So, what's with those? I let a small smile slip. We'll get to that. Melissa stiffened. Mom laughed nervously. You always have surprises, she said, trying to keep things light. I cut another piece of chicken, calm as ever. Only when they're needed. The conversation meandered after that, light topics that everyone clung to like lifeboats. But the weight of those envelopes sat in the center of the table like a silent guest. At one point, Melissa excused herself to check on her phone. I followed her glance toward her purse near the hallway. Her phone screen had lit up, and for a brief second I saw the word landlord flash across the notifications. Interesting. She returned a minute later with a too bright smile. Everything okay? I asked casually. Yes, just a message from a friend, she said quickly. I didn't push. I didn't need to. When everyone's plates were mostly empty and the conversation started to thin, I reached for my water glass and tapped it gently with a fork. The sound was soft but commanding. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I'd like us to open the envelopes now, I said, my voice steady. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Mom blinked. Envelopes. Yes, I said. Go ahead. Dad reached for his first. Melissa hesitated, fingers hovering over the flap like someone holding a live wire. Mom looked between us nervously. I didn't say a word. I just watched. The tearing of paper filled the room as the first envelope opened. And just like that, the performance they'd built for years began to crack, quietly, inevitably at my table. For a moment no one spoke. The warm light above the table cast sharp shadows across their faces, like a stage suddenly illuminated for a performance none of them had rehearsed. I watched them closely, Dad's brow furrowing, Mom's lips parting in confusion, Melissa's hands trembling ever so slightly as she held her envelope like it might burn her fingers. She glanced at me, searching for a clue. I gave her nothing. Dad was the first to pull the folded pages from his envelope. His glasses slid down his nose as he scanned the first lines. At first he looked puzzled, his lips moving silently as he read. Then his face changed, confusion giving way to dawning understanding. His jaw tightened. He turned the page, then another. Mom opened hers slowly, careful not to tear the edges. "What is this?" she asked softly, her voice uncertain. "It's the truth," I replied calmly. "In black and white." Melissa hadn't opened hers yet. She held it like a guilty person hesitating before reading a confession. Her thumb pressed nervously on the flap. She laughed once, forced, brittle. "What is this supposed to be, some kind of presentation?" I didn't answer. I just folded my hands in my lap and waited. When she finally tore it open, her reaction wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Her eyes flicked back and forth, her breathing quickened, her hand went to her hair. She flipped through the pages faster than her father had, skimming for an escape route that wasn't there. Every transfer. Every note. Every month. I'd highlighted key moments in red, not to shame but to make sure nothing could be brushed aside. There was no room for vague excuses tonight. Dad spoke first. "Are these bank transfers?" His voice was low, not angry yet, but heavy with the weight of something that couldn't be denied. "Yes," I said simply. "Every single one. From 2019 to last month." Mom's eyes widened as she reached the total at the bottom. She pressed her hand against her chest. $126,000, she whispered. I nodded. "That's the total. All documented. Quietly. Consistently. While she was being called independent." Melissa slammed her pages onto the table. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're making me sound like dependent." I finished for her. Her mouth snapped shut. The air in the room changed after that. All the politeness from earlier dissolved. Mom's face was pale. Dad sat rigid in his chair. Melissa shifted restlessly, eyes darting between them, me and the stack of papers as if searching for a sympathetic face. "Why would you do this?" she hissed. "Why would you bring this here like this? You could have talked to me privately." I tilted my head. "I have talked to you privately. For years. Every time you said you'd pay me back. Every time you said this was the last time. You remember those conversations, don't you?" She looked down. "Things were hard." I cut her off gently. "For 6 years. Mom finally found her voice. "I didn't know it was this much," she said faintly. "I thought you were just helping her a little here and there." "Exactly," I replied. "Because that's how it was always framed. Little here. Little there. Quiet. Unnoticed. Until I added it up." Dad cleared his throat, his voice tightening. "Melissa, is this true?" She bristled. "I mean, yes, but it's not like she had to do it. She wanted to help me. And I'll pay her back eventually." That was the moment the mask cracked. Not fully, but enough to see what lay beneath. The entitlement in her tone wasn't new. It had always been there, just carefully hidden under charm and excuses. I leaned forward slightly. Independent people don't rely on someone else to keep their world from collapsing. They don't hand out my phone number to landlords as if I'm their personal guarantor. They don't let people praise them for standing on their own while I'm the one holding them up behind the curtain. Her eyes flashed. "You didn't have to say that in front of them," she spat. "And you didn't have to build your independence on my silence," I replied quietly. The room fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed louder. Dad looked down at the documents again, flipping through as if hoping the numbers might change on the second read. Mom kept glancing between us like she was watching two people on opposite sides of a fault line. Melissa shifted tactics. Her voice softened, trying to sound wounded. "I didn't realize it hurt you this much," she said. "You should have told me how you felt." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you really want to talk about feelings or about facts?" Her expression hardened again. She wasn't used to me holding ground like this. For years I'd been the quiet one, the fixer, the older sister who didn't make a fuss. But tonight at my table that version of me was gone. Then something unexpected happened. Dad pushed the papers away and leaned back, staring at her. "Melissa," he said slowly, "is this why you always seemed fine? Even when you didn't have steady work?" She crossed her arms. "So what if she helped me? Families help each other. Families don't lie about it," he snapped. It wasn't loud, but it was the sharpest tone I'd heard from him in years. Melissa flinched. That moment wasn't planned, but it was powerful. For the first time, the pedestal she'd stood on for so long started to wobble. I sat back, letting the conversation shift without pushing it. This wasn't about humiliating her. It was about holding up a mirror and refusing to let her look away. She tried again to control the narrative. "You're just doing this because you're jealous," she blurted suddenly. "You've always been critical of me." That one almost made me laugh. "Jealous?" I repeated slowly. "Melissa, I've spent years funding the life you pretend to have. There's nothing there to envy." Her cheeks flushed deep red. "You're cruel," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm done." The conversation grew tangled after that. Emotional, raw. Mom tried to soothe. Dad demanded explanations. Melissa alternated between defensive and pitiful. But I stayed steady. Every question that came my way, I answered with quiet clarity. Every accusation I met with fact. For every "I didn't mean to," there was a date. For every "you're exaggerating," there was a figure. For every "this isn't fair," there was a pattern. Piece by piece, the image of her independence unraveled in front of them. At one point, Mom wiped her eyes. "I feel like I didn't see any of this," she murmured. "You didn't," I said softly. "Because I didn't let you. I didn't want to embarrass her. I thought maybe she'd find her footing eventually. But she didn't. She just got comfortable." Melissa buried her face in her hands. "Stop," she muttered. "Just stop." But I didn't. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. Because parasites don't stop pretending until someone stops feeding them. The dinner plates had gone cold, the wine untouched. The house smelled faintly of roasted chicken and something sharper, the metallic scent of truth hanging in the air. Melissa stared at the papers spread before her like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. Her phone buzzed again from her purse. Another message from landlord. She ignored it, but Dad didn't. He noticed. His eyes narrowed. A new layer of reality was beginning to unfold for him too. I didn't say a word. That clue was for later. Finally, Melissa whispered, "What do you want from me?" The question wasn't angry. It was small. Frayed at the edges. I took a deep breath. "I want honesty. I want accountability. And I want this performance to end." She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Because for her, accountability had never been part of the script. The night ended without hugs, without the usual drive-safe chatter at the door. They left quietly, Mom clutching her envelope, Dad walking stiffly, Melissa trailing behind like someone who'd just had the ground pulled out from under her. I stood in the doorway after they were gone, the cool night air washing over my face. The house was quiet again. The table was a mess of papers, empty plates, and unspoken truths. And at the center of it all sat the red envelopes. Now opened, exposed, undeniable. I didn't clean anything up that night. I just stood there for a long moment, staring at the wreckage of a dinner that had been years in the making. The house felt different. Not heavy anymore, but hollow, like it had released something it had been holding in for too long. I turned off the lights one by one, leaving the dining room for last. The envelopes glowed faintly under the overhead light, their contents scattered like evidence after a storm. I flipped the switch. Darkness fell. And for the first time in a long time I slept deeply. The morning came quietly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and golden. The air felt clearer. I made my coffee and sat by the kitchen window listening to the sound of birds outside. It was strange. After everything that had unfolded the night before, there was no anxiety in my chest. Just stillness. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Melissa. "I hope you're happy. You humiliated me." I stared at it for a few seconds, then set the phone down without replying. Her words no longer carried the power they once did. Another message followed. "I can't pay next month's rent. I need you to fix this." That one made me smile. Not out of cruelty but out of recognition. Even now, after everything, she still assumed I'd step in. I typed a single response. No. And hit send. Over the next week, the silence between us stretched. She didn't call. She didn't visit. But the consequences of her choices began to unfold piece by piece. Like dominoes she had lined up herself years ago, now finally tipping over. On Wednesday afternoon, I was coming home from the grocery store when I noticed a white envelope tucked in my mailbox. It wasn't mine. It was addressed to Melissa, mistakenly delivered to my house. Old habits, I suppose. The return address was from her landlord. I felt a slight chill run down my spine as I slid it open. Notice of eviction proceedings. 14 days to remedy. So it had begun. The next evening there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Melissa stood there. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. She didn't have her usual polished look. No makeup, no styled hair. Just a woman standing on a crumbling foundation. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside. "Come in." She sat at the same dining table where the truth had detonated a week earlier. She glanced at the chair she'd occupied that night, hesitating before sitting down again. I joined her, placing my hands calmly on the table. She exhaled shakily. "I got the notice," she said. "I know," I replied. "It was delivered here by mistake." Her eyes flashed with frustration. "You could have called me." I raised an eyebrow. "Why? So I could fix it for you? That's what got us here." She stared down at her hands. I don't know what to do." For the first time, there was no manipulation in her voice. No forced sweetness. Just fear. The performance had cracked completely. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "You have options. Get a job. Talk to your landlord. Move in with mom and dad for a while. Figure it out." She looked up, desperate. "I can't go back there. You know how dad is. He'll never let me forget it." I nodded slowly. "Neither will I." Her eyes watered. "I'm not asking for much. Just a little more time. A few months. Please." I shook my head. "No. Melissa, I spent years giving you a few months. Years. Do you understand that?" She flinched like the words physically struck her. "You built a life on my silence," I continued, my voice steady but not cruel. "But that silence is over." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So what now? You're just going to watch me lose everything?" I paused before answering. "No. I'm going to let you face everything." She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. And maybe she didn't. For years I'd been her safety net. Now I was the woman cutting the ropes. The following days unfolded like the slow turn of a page in a book. Melissa moved out of her apartment before the eviction went through. She didn't tell me directly. I heard it from Joan, my neighbor, who saw her hauling boxes out late one evening. "Looked like she was in a hurry," Joan said, shaking her head. 2 days later, Dad called. His voice was tight, serious. "Your sister's moving into the guest room for a while," he said. "I know," I replied. "You really aren't going to help her?" I took a breath. "No, Dad. Not anymore." There was a long silence. "She's your sister," he finally said. "She still is," I answered softly. "But I'm done being her solution." He didn't argue after that. Maybe he finally understood. Melissa's adjustment wasn't smooth. She called twice during the first week at Mom and Dad's house, both times late at night. The first call was tearful. "I can't stand it here," she whispered. "Dad keeps reminding me about everything. Mom hovers. I don't have any space." I listened quietly. When she finished, I said, "This is what independence looks like when the safety net disappears." The second call wasn't tearful. It was angry. "You set me up," she spat. "You wanted this to happen." I didn't defend myself. "No," I said calmly. "You set yourself up. I just stopped covering for you." She hung up on me. But something interesting happened in the weeks that followed. She stopped calling. She got a part-time job at a local bakery. Joan mentioned it casually one morning while watering her flowers. "Saw your sister down at the corner bakery," she said. "Didn't think I'd ever see her in an apron." Neither did I. Then came the final twist. The one I had prepared quietly months earlier without even realizing how powerful it would become. I received an email from the bank confirming the closure of a joint emergency account I'd once opened for family purposes. I had set it up years ago, back when I still believed Melissa would grow out of her dependency. She had access to it, but I had always maintained control. A week after the dinner, I'd transferred the remaining balance, a small but symbolic $5,000, into my personal account and closed it permanently. It was a simple act, but it was the final thread. She didn't know about the closure until the landlord tried to draft the rent automatically, and the transaction failed. That was the night she texted me in a panic. "The account isn't working. Did you change something?" I typed slowly. "No. I ended something." And that was it. 1 month after the dinner, I found myself back at my dining table. The same polished wood. The same soft overhead light. But the feeling was entirely different. The table was clear now. No envelopes. No piles of documents. Just a cup of tea and the quiet hum of my house. I wasn't waiting for her to call anymore. I wasn't wondering how to rescue her next. That part of my life had ended. A few weeks later, I ran into Melissa outside the grocery store. She looked tired but different, grounded in a way I hadn't seen before. She wore her bakery uniform, flour dusting her sleeves. She hesitated when she saw me. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," I replied. For a moment we just stood there. No accusations. No pretending. Just two sisters finally stripped of the performance. "I got the job," she said almost defensively. "I heard," I replied with a small nod. "Good." She shifted awkwardly. "I'm trying." "I know," I said softly. We didn't hug. But we didn't walk away bitter either. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I thought about everything that had happened. For years, my quiet support had allowed her to build a life that wasn't real. My revenge hadn't been loud. It hadn't been cruel. It had been precise. I didn't destroy her. I just stopped saving her. And when I walked away, she finally faced reality. I looked at the stars outside, their light steady and distant, and smiled to myself. This time it wasn't the quiet smile of someone holding a secret. It was the smile of someone who had finally reclaimed her story. If this story gripped you, subscribe for more dark, emotional revenge stories, where quiet women take their power back.